Book 5, Salem, Safety Assured, Leaving East of Medicetti. Chapter 7, Do You Still Trust Me? Amazing, Perrin said once the sun broke through the clouds a little after sunrise. Listen, Dak, Pato said to his brother-in-law with childlike innocence. Father's trying to play my eye can spy. I bet he can see something big and rocky. Perrin chuckled as Clark negotiated a large stone. No, what I mean is, even if we had dared to venture this far up the mountain, I can't imagine how we would have navigated the rock. The boulders on either side of the narrow trail stood as high as the horses and lay on top of each other in piles, as if the mountain range had once been more majestic, but allowed some of its height to tumble down to where the weather was milder. Shem had led them into the maze, which rose several hundred paces up the mountainside. In a trail between the boulders, they were concealed nearly completely. Perrin stood up once in the stirrups, his head just higher than the rock, and reported that he could barely see edge. Shem, how do we get around this? He called up to the lead horse. Narrower trails branched off into the rock, but Shem didn't follow any of them. He turned around in his saddle and grinned. We don't go around the boulders. We go through. How? Asked an astonished Dak. You'll see. In the meantime, enjoy the views. Of what? Pato groused. First views of black, now views of house-side boulders. Scenic, Shem, very scenic. But Mari shook her head in amazement. Or mazement, perhaps. From her home she had seen the swath of rock which ran above the tree line along the base of the mountain range, but rarely thought much of it. Yet today she understood what an ant must experience trying to pick its way through a rocky riverbed. As if to compensate for their suspenseful forest travel, the ride was mercifully dull. The horses had been hidden far to the west, so they plodded east again into a bright sun, which dried both cloaks and beasts. While grateful for the light and warmth, Mari learned that the odor of wet horses was worse than the sulfur pits. It didn't help that drifts of steam rose from Clark and headed straight up her nose. Despite it all, Mari felt herself falling in and out of sleep as Perrin guided Clark, but it was impossible to rest. Each time her eyelids drooped, she thought she heard a newborn crying in the distance. Her head snapped up for good when she heard Shem call out, Here's the path. We're still west of where we left Jatesy, so they'll catch up to us in a while. It took our ancestors a full season of exploration to find a route horses could travel. But when we found it, we didn't need to move any rock or excavate any dirt. Miraculously, the Creator had already made a way to escape. We just had to find it. Pato, behind Shem, muttered, Yes, this is very convenient. Shem twisted to consider Pato, then, without a word, turned back in his saddle, prodded his horse up into the boulders, and disappeared. Pato looked back at his parents in alarm as his horse automatically followed Shem's. Dak went next, and finally Mari and Perrin made the left turn into another narrow route. It was as if the boulders, each several hands higher than the horses' heads, had been deliberately placed to allow passage for the width of a horse and rider. The path rose steeply through the rock, turning and twisting at intervals with alternate routes branching off to ends they couldn't see. Only a crack of sky was visible above the narrows. Even if we ever had chased someone up here, Perrin whispered in Mari's ear. It seemed inappropriate to speak any louder. We would have lost them in here after their first few paces. We could wander in here for days and never find the route up and out. After several more turns, the constricted path opened into a surprisingly large cavern, big enough to hold 40 horses, and the temperature was cool and comfortable. Off the main cavern were several smaller chambers, all dimly lit by sunlight which slipped through the cracks. One chamber held bundles of supplies. Another looked like a makeshift stable. Still another had hanging from the rock several net litters like Jates's. Shem slid off his horse and spread open his arms. "Welcome to the first resting station." His 4 followers just sat on their horses, stunned at the view that had suddenly opened up to them. "Where exactly are we?" Perrin asked. "About halfway up the rock line," Shem told them proudly. "It's impossible to see any of this from edge. I've tried many times, even with your scope. Now, by my estimation, we have a few minutes before Jatesy arrives. Then we'll eat, nap, and continue on our journey after the sun's dried everything up. Any objections?" Pato perked up. "Did you say eat?" "Yes, he did," Azrar said from an unnoticed corner. "Potatoes, the first berries of the season, ham, and biscuits made fresh last night. If you would like to join me in the eating room." She smiled as she gestured to a large flat rock set for a meal. Mari felt like crying for joy. She slid off of Clark and then she just felt like crying, stuck in a permanently hunched position. "Oh, Azrar, could you bring some of that over here? My legs can't seem to remember how to move without a horse under them." Pato chuckled at his mother until he slid off his horse. "Oh, ow," and he slumped to the floor. "Now I'm conveniently disabled. Couldn't run away if I tried," he murmured. Perrin shook his head. "Boy, I tried to get you to ride at the fort, but you always said, 'No, I'm not going to be a soldier.'" He dismounted, stretched easily and with great emphasis, then scooped up his son under his arms and dragged him to the rock table. "Never laugh at your mother," he said, dropping Pato on the dirt floor. Pato looked up at him and fluttered his eyes. "Whatever you order, sir." He whimpered at the platters, full and waiting. Perrin sauntered over to Mari, who wore her best pathetic expression. "But you, my poor darling wife." Perrin scooped her up tenderly and carried her to the rock table. He sat her on a makeshift stone chair, and immediately she realized that was a mistake. "We have something to rub on your backside to help," Azrar said as she saw Mari's discomfort. "And I'm sure there's enough for Pato, too." Dek remained on his horse, focused on the entrance to the cavern. "Shem, maybe I could just go out and look?" "You'll never find your way out or back," Shem told him. "But I promise you, she's safe. I feel it." "I know," Dek said quietly. "I feel it too. I just hate her not knowing that we're safe. Why isn't she here yet?" "The horses take it slow and easy with the expecting mothers," Shem said. Seeing that wasn't enough for Dek, he offered, "Come eat, and then the 2 of us can do a little scouting for her." "She's all right, Dek," Mari told him. "I'm sure of it." Dek sent another fleeting look down the shadowy paths before reluctantly dismounting. Throughout breakfast, which they agreed tasted better than anything anywhere, Dek kept his eyes on the narrows. He was the first to hear a faint sound of a horse snorting, and leaped to his feet, breaking into a run across the cavern. At the entrance he waited to see which path would produce his wife. Finally a large black draft horse emerged, with Jothan in the lead. He smiled at Dek and said, "She is well." The swinging litter came through next with Jatesy. The midwife's horse soon appeared, and they stopped in the cavern. Mari did her best to stand up, and waddled even more ridiculously than her daughter. "Jatesy," she called, but Dek spun around to shush her. "She's asleep," Mari whispered loudly. Not that an expecting mother didn't deserve a good sleep, but it didn't seem fair. "She dozed off soon after we left you," Barb said, dismounting. "The poor thing was so exhausted." "She's exhausted," Pato said from the ground near the table. He wasn't about to leap to his feet for anything except more biscuits. Jothan dismounted, made a quick assessment of his sleeping charge, then strode over to Azrar, who handed him a plate of breakfast. But he set it down and hugged her instead. Mari felt a stab of guilt that she'd forgotten there was another husband and wife, deeply worried about each other all night. Jatsi stretched in her litter and sighed, her eyes still shut. "That was the most pleasant night I've had in a season." She opened her eyes. "What a cozy little place here. Hi, Dak," she said breezily. Dak's mouth fell open. He glanced back at an equally surprised Mari, then to his wife again, not knowing how to react. "Is there anything to eat?" she asked. "I'm a bit hungry. I guess traveling all that way works up an appetite." "Mother, you look terrible. Have you even seen your hair?" Mari stared at her, astonished. Jatsi attempted to untangle herself from the net, and Dak helped her out so that he could catch her in a hug. "That's all you have to say? I'm hungry. Do you need a brush?" Barb chuckled. "Yes, Jatsi, there's breakfast." Dak gently shook Jatsi's shoulders. "I was so worried about you, with the storm and Thorn's men and—" "Wait," Jatsi said, stepping out of his embrace. "Storm? And what men?" You don't know about the storm? How could you not know about the storm?" Dak nearly shouted, but he shook that off. "Thorn didn't even know we were here," he said. His eyes became steely as he added, "He was planning to visit us today, but for whatever reason, well, I've chosen not to think about it." "Wait a minute. You spoke to Lemuel?" Jatsi paled. "No," Dak said. "That was when he was yelling at us." "What?" Jatsi was more befuddled than her husband. "He was yelling at you, but you didn't speak to him?" Dak squinted. "We didn't see him until the end." "So why would he be yelling at you? This makes no sense." Pato sighed in exasperation from the stone where he was inhaling yet another plate of potatoes. "You two are ridiculous. He was yelling at us when he was killing Shem." Jatsi's eyes widened. "No! Uncle Shem!" "Is right here. Shem rushed to her side. "Honestly, you two," he said as Jatsi embraced him, "your marriage will be better if you learn to communicate more clearly." "Said the man who never married," Perrin announced. "Jatsi, come sit and eat. Then we can explain everything, or at least try." Barb grinned at the plate Azrar handed her. "You always manage to create the most amazing meals in the middle of the rocks. I didn't inherit that trait, unfortunately." Azrar, who first made sure that Jatsi had more food than 3 expecting women could eat, blushed a deeper brown at the compliment before she took her own breakfast. Pato frowned. "You're related?" "Everyone is, Pato." Barb sat down at a nearby rock table. "The first line of the writings is, 'We are all family.' But I know what you mean, and yes, we share the same great-grandmother on our mother's side." Pato squinted at her, then at Azrar. "Don't let the colors fool you," Barb told him. "Our great-grandmother was apparently a brown right in the middle of us, and a marvelous cook. But because I can't even flip a pancake, I became a midwife instead. Babies don't need frequent flipping." Azrar chuckled and sat by her cousin and husband. "Thank you for bringing back Jothan today, Barb. I didn't expect to see him until this evening. What happened to Kieran?" "Long story, but he'll be back up by midday meal with the others, I assume. My sister will be quite put out if he gets into trouble." Pato, listening in, said, "So is Kieran related as well?" "My nephew," Barb said. "My usual medical assistant, but a wannabe scout. He sneaks off whenever he can." Pato turned back to his own table to mull that over, but soon he groaned quietly about his view. Deck was sitting by his wife, who was gobbling biscuits as if she hadn't eaten in weeks. But he didn't notice the crumbs on her chin or the honey on her fingers. He just kept a hand on her belly and sighed. "It really is a miracle, isn't it?" he said. "This night, what we experienced, what you didn't experience?" Pato was growing nauseated, not from Azrar's cooking, but from Deck fawning all over his sister. How could a solid, logical man be so soppy? Sure, Pato was glad to see his sister was safe, but now Deck was wrapping her long braid around his hand and kissing it? It was getting to him. Everything was getting to him. His eyes burned with fatigue and frustration. "Oh, please," he said as he slumped on the dirt floor near Shem's rock chair. "I'll tell you what a real miracle would have been. Being plucked up by two giant fingers from our house and set down wherever we're going. I would call that a miracle." "Pato, that's it," Shem exclaimed. He pivoted on his rock and planted his hands on his knees. "What's up? You've had this attitude ever since I found you all in the forest. Something's up with you, Pato. Come on, let's get it all out." Pato steeled himself. Something was up with him? That was the year's understatement. Dragged all over the forest and then through the rock. He was still trying to categorize every detail his foggy brain could still suck in, just in case. His spirits dropped to the bottom of his sore bottom. There was no way he could find his way back to Edge now. It was obvious their entire journey was designed to confuse and disorient them. Yes, well done, Shem and Salem Garter people. I'm imprisoned here with everyone else and headed to who knows where. And my parents sit there thinking that all is great and wonderful, along with my dopey brother-in-law and my clueless sister. This is a better trap than any incarceration cell, and Shem has the nerve to wonder what's up. Pato was sure some of his acrimony was revealed in his eyes, and Shem recoiled under his stare. "All right," he said slowly. "I think I see what's going on here. Tell me, Pato, do you trust me?" Oh, he could answer that. Most definitely he could answer that. "Of course not. Why should I? I mean, I've known you my whole life." Pato was fully aware that his startled parents were trying to slip in a word, but he ignored them. "And yesterday I learned that you've always led a double life. Since then, I found myself questioning everything you ever did, everything you ever said. Something's up. Something's been up with you for 17 years. "Pato!" Mari exclaimed, and Perrin cleared his throat in warning, while Deck and Jatsi reeled at Pato's forwardness. Shem just held Pato's gaze. Barb let out a low whistle and glanced over at the Hafadis. Azrar coughed politely. "I think we can afford young Mr. Shin his skepticism. After all, the many weeks we usually spend teaching about our ways was condensed into a couple of hours, and Pato heard it only secondhand from his parents." As reluctant as Pato was to trust these people, he nodded once at Azrar for her recognition that all of this had been a bit much to take. "For all we know," Pato railed onward, "this is the whole of Salem, right in front of us." "But there were hundreds in the forest," Mari began. "We saw only a dozen, Mother. They've been telling you all kinds of things, but without any evidence." Perrin jumped in with, "The slash on Jothan's hand, Pato. I caused that years ago when I was attacked." "Or so you think. He could have gotten that scar from anything and conveniently let you believe whatever you needed to in order to follow them into this trap." There, he'd said it. Now what would they do to him for revealing their secrets? It didn't matter. He'd stay brave and strong in the face of their denial. Everyone stared at him, stunned into silence. You're right, Azrar, Shem said eventually. In his eyes, we haven't done anything to earn his trust. That's right, you haven't, Pato said. Still won't even tell us where we're going or how far? Pato, Perrin cut in. They have their reasons. Oh, I'm sure they do, he wailed. I've heard that a few times already. We have our reasons, and they're good. Do we even know why they want us in Salem? What? Pato, Mari spluttered. After all they've done for us, how can you demand answers? All of his frustration from the long day and even longer night gushed out. Why shouldn't I? I mean, why do they want us? Maybe they need more laborers. Ever think of that? Or maybe they're using us like Clark. Perrin scowled. Like Clark? I heard Shem in the forest. Pato was unstoppable, ideas and fears flowing out of him like one of the rancid pools they passed in the night. He said to take Clark to Salem because they needed fresh blood in the herds. All of these people are related. He gestured madly to the Hephates and Barb, who looked more amused than alarmed. Maybe they need new human breeding stock. Barb burst out laughing at that, and the Hephates gently chuckled. Pato twitched in annoyance as Shem tried not to snort. Oh, Pato, you have no idea, just no idea at all. Actually, you have lots of ideas, and all of them insane. You're overly tired. I understand. Oh, no, you don't, Pato insisted, trying to stifle a yawn. It's you who don't understand. Barb, who was still laughing, wiped away a tear from her eyes. You're right, Shem. He's hilarious. Except right now, he doesn't mean to be, I'm sure. Sorry that I'm laughing, but really, Pato, we're taking your family as breeding stock? Your mother can't have any more children. Your sister is already expecting. Your father and brother-in-law have been spoken for, so the only one we would be taking to Salem for breeding stock would be you. Trust me, Pato. She looked him up and down critically. We're not that desperate. Pato fumed as everyone in the cavern howled in laughter, even his parents. He sank further on the floor and rubbed his head, fatigued, irritated, and now slightly humiliated. All right, Shem said, gesturing to quiet everyone down. Pato, I'm sorry. You're absolutely right. Not about wanting you for labor or as a stud for Salemite women. Someone snorted, likely Dick. But you're right in that you have no reason to trust me. I've deceived you, Shem admitted. And you have every right to wonder about everything I've ever said or done. So tell me this. Do you trust your father? Pato sighed. Is this a trick question? A Salem deception? No tricks, no deceptions. Do you trust your father? Yes, when he's thinking clear-headedly. Perrin tilted his head. And you think I'm not? Not recently, no, Pato admitted. Barb definitely whistled at that, and Mari stared, stunned. Pato sent his mother a look that said, as kindly as possible, that she hadn't been very clear-headed lately either. Shem turned to Perrin. My friend and brother, and I call you that because not even a real brother could be closer to me. I have deceived you for 17 years. That's true. Shem's earnestness was unnerving, and Pato shifted uncomfortably. Stupid saddle sores. But I never did anything that I didn't think you wouldn't approve of, Shem said. I deceived you to save lives and to keep you from taking any innocent life. Do you still trust me? Perrin didn't hesitate. Completely. I always knew that I could trust you with anything. My brother has never failed me. Thank you, he whispered. So, He turned again to Pato. If you can trust your father, and he trusts me, it can be concluded that you can trust me. Ah, no, Pato moaned. This is going to be a debate, isn't it? Now that we've left the reach of Idemia, the debating begins. Pato. Shem's seriousness caused Pato to meet his eyes, and once again he was startled by a Shem Zenus he didn't quite know. You're too old to be cynical anymore. Your sarcasm is chipping away at what you claim to believe. Soon you'll have nothing left. Pato, people in Idemia believe the purpose of life is to indulge yourself until you die. But I promise you that the purpose of life is to pass the test the Creator has set. You must believe me. I know all that. I've been taught about the test. He bobbed his head to his parents, who watched him intently. And I've even read the writings on my own. But you don't believe it, said Shem flatly. Yes, I do. No, Pato, you don't really believe it. In here. Shem placed his hand on Pato's chest. The immense weight of it pressed him into the rock behind him. If you really believed it, Pato, you would humbly accept what you experienced last night. And you wouldn't be fighting the need to roll your eyes at me. I see that twitching right there. Everything that's come out of your mouth since I found you has been bitter and caustic. And you have no faith in me, or maybe in anything. But I'm telling you, if you choose not to believe what you know deep down to be true, you'll be as callous as everyone we left behind. I believe, Pato defended quietly, but I just didn't see any miracles last night. Shem removed his hand. So what did you see? You and your friends there manipulating situations, he said, saying the right things, making my family believe this was their only choice, and you still won't tell us why. And we got lucky. You've got to admit it. Thorn got washed away by a stray storm. Perrin cleared his throat again, but Shem held up a finger. If I may, Perrin. Turning back to Pato, Shem said, It's quite a list you've been working on there. Manipulation, saying the right things, and luck. That's not what I saw last night. What a surprise, Pato said dully. So what did you see? Miracles, Pato. More than you realize, obviously. And I'll tell you why we took you last night, and why we've said all the right things. But are you willing to hear me out? What do you mean by that? Are you willing to listen? Are you willing to suspend your cynicism for 10 minutes and really listen to my side of the story? Pato scoffed. Oh, I've been waiting to hear your side of the story. Shem rubbed his hands on his trousers. I've never seen you quite like this before. Nor I you, Pato said coldly. I guess we're both seeing things we've never seen before. Pato, please, Mari exclaimed, but Shem held up his hand. No, Mari, it's all right. I've got this. I'm sure you do, Pato said, making sure his every word dripped all the contempt he could wring out. But Shem wasn't about to be deterred. I get it, Pato. You think I've done something horribly wrong here, and I also suspect you're trying to find a way out of all of this. I'm guessing, he continued, that you've been looking for a way to rescue your family from my rescue of your family. That you think I've twisted situations and words to get them all the way up here, where anything could happen to them, and no one in Edge or Idemia would ever know. Pato's cheeks twitched from the effort to not make them move. What? Exclaimed Mari. But Shem nodded once to Pato, who knew that something on his face gave him away anyway. Glad we got that out of the way. Maybe once you finish listening to me, you'll see things differently. I told you that I saw miracles. Shem continued in a tone that made Peto's skin want to break out in goosebumps. The Creator's hand was in every incident last night, but some people will always refuse to see it. 2 giant fingers could have flicked Thorn off his horse like a fly off of pie, and Lemuel would still find a way to explain it away as some coincidence. Do you know why we came to take you last night and not some other night? No, Peto said shortly. Astonish me. Challenge accepted. Peto, we planned this escape the very night your mother made Mr. Corey realize he was mistaken that public speaking would be a good career move. When she tried 3 weeks ago to debate the administrator's assistant about Terrap's land being poisoned, and then she declared to Olive Edge that the findings were a lie, we knew she was going to be in trouble. Then when your father resigned from the army that night, instead of becoming High General Shin, we realized it was time to get all of you out. We chose yesterday's date only because I would have returned from my leave in time to make sure that the eastern route was clear. But I went to Idemia instead of home in order to spy for you. Your father didn't tell you what I learned there because he wanted all of you to be calm. Why? Mari asked, her voice no longer calm. Because by now, Shem said to her, Administrator Genev is in Edge with 3 coaches. Mari's eyes grew big, and Perrin squeezed her hand. And why 3? She asked. 1 for Perrin, 1 for you, and 1 for Peto. Mari turned gray. Dek wrapped a supportive arm around Jatsi, who had gone pale as she nibbled a berry. Peto felt as if he'd been punched in the gut. Forgetting to doubt Shem's account, he asked, why were they sending coaches for us? Because after 2.5 weeks of arguing, the administrators finally passed the Ideas and Association Law, wherein a person could be tried for sedition, based not on any act or crime, but based solely on their vocal and obvious disagreement with the administrators. Peto, the law was designed specifically to punish her. Shem pointed at Mari, but kept his gaze on Peto. Mari withered. Dear Creator! And him. Shem pointed at Perrin, who closed his eyes. And you. He finally pointed at Peto, who felt as if his finger were a long knife aimed at him. Because you lived in their house during the past year, and were subject to the influence of their ideas, guilty of their ideas by association. Something deep inside told Peto it was true, all of it. He had no other evidence but the swelling in his gut, the heat in his chest, and the impression in his mind, but he felt it. He and his parents were in grave danger. Shem put a heavy hand on his shoulder. The law went into effect last night at midnight. This morning at dawn, you and your parents would have been taken, each in your own coach and each in chains, to Idemia for trial. He ignored the quiet weeping of Mari. You would have been found guilty, Peto, and most likely incarcerated at the garrison for the rest of your life. A place much nastier than this cozy cavern. Perrin might have been given the same punishment, we're not sure. But your mother? Gadaman started a file on her years ago, when you were just a baby, simply because she wrote a letter. It escalated from there. Genev and General Thorn want her dead. Shem turned when he heard the gasp. I'm sorry, Mari. I guess I didn't put that too delicately, did I? Mari had buried her face in her husband's chest, and Perrin wrapped his arms around her. If Peto weren't already on the ground, he would have been. Stupid 4th plate of potatoes making him feel sick. There is something to be said about upholding the law and all that, Shem seemed to think he should mention. And I pledged as a soldier to uphold the decrees of the administrators, but only to the benefit of the world as a whole. I didn't think executing your mother would be good for everyone involved, so we essentially took the law into our own hands." Jatesy sniffed, and Shem said to her, "You would have been spared. Thorne was trying to work something out. I'm not sure of his intentions for you, but I suspect Deck wasn't a part of it." Jatesy nodded sadly. Shem continued, "Jatesy, when I heard that you were feeling pains a couple of days ago, I began a fast, asking that the Creator would stop the pains and allow you to come with us." Pato heard that strange word, and despite everything, he had to ask, "What's a fast?" Shem glanced back at him. "Going without food and water for a day and a night, to show the Creator one's sincerity about a request." "Oh," was all he could say, feeling guilty about the 5th biscuit. "I knew we couldn't leave you behind," Shem said to Jatesy, "not when Thorne could have access to you." "And I prayed so hard to let the baby come," Jatesy said softly. "I couldn't imagine why he wouldn't give me what I wanted." "And yet I knew it was not the right thing," Deck said. "I guess I prayed against you, Jates. Sorry." Shem turned back to Pato, who was startled to find he was again the center of Shem's lecture. "And so, for the first time in any official action, since Captain Shin forced a terrified Lieutenant Carner to follow him, the Army entered the forest in pursuit of a new organization of traitors." Perrin kissed the top of Mari's head. "And I suppose the chairman of that new organization is you." Even Pato could tell his father's timing was rotten. "Oh, Perrin," Mari wailed. "I had no idea. I know my mouth has gotten me into trouble before, but nothing like this. I'm so sorry. Gadaman really had a file about me?" Perrin increased his wife-rocking. Mari, don't fret, and don't worry about that file. Shem stole it, and we buried it in Deck's barn 2 nights ago." Deck smiled slyly. "I knew you must have done something more than just sit in the straw and talk. You misplaced my shovels." Perrin shrugged his apology and said to his wife, "You did nothing wrong. You spoke the truth. Your mouth didn't get us into trouble. Ida Mia did. In fact, it's because of your mouth we're finally going in the right direction, away from the world. You've done us a favor," he decided. Mari nodded, but was clearly unconvinced. "Pato, there have been many miracles," Shem said, because obviously there was still more to the lecture. "Had Jatesy's baby been born 2 days ago, she wouldn't have been able to walk the many miles she did, and a newborn's cries would have given away our position. Consider the cloud cover last night. Under 2 full moons, you can sometimes see nearly half a mile into that forest. Last night, you could barely see 10 paces. We chose a night with just slivers of moons, but the Creator sent cloud cover to hide all light." Pato was looking down at his hands, unable to face Shem, or the quality in his voice that made his chest burn. "Consider the marshes. Usually they're low because the canals drain them, but because we had such a heavy snowpack this year, the marshes are deeper than usual. 20 soldiers were caught when, in a normal year, their horses could have easily waded through." Jatesy had pulled away from Deck's shoulder and listened in fascination. "How many men did the captain send out?" "Nearly everyone. And even though he was down to about 160, that's still a lot," Shem told her, and Jatesy silently mouthed the number. He turned back to Pato. "Consider the fear of the men. Your father has trained them to ignore their fear, but on unfamiliar territory, with an angry commander they didn't trust, they fell apart. I have no doubt that if your father were at the head of those men, they would have stood firm, found their courage, and found their victims." Perrin winced at that word. "Lastly, Pato, consider the storm." Pato couldn't meet Shem's eyes for the pressure building in his own. Storms don't move from west to east here. They go north to south in a westerly way. We prayed for its assistance, and it came with enough violence so that your father and I had to use none." "That's what I prayed for when you asked us to," Perrin said quietly. "To escape without my family witnessing violence by my hand, or suffering violence by the hand of others." "Think of the horses," Shem continued. "What do horses do in a storm? Do they calmly stand in a line?" Pato shook his head, not trusting his voice. "And when lightning strikes," Shem asked, "do horses patiently wait, or do they whinny and buck and rear? You don't have to answer that because you may not know," he added, "but I have never seen those horses so well behaved. The Creator can cause all things, and he can calm all things. And lastly, consider that Jatsi experienced none of the storm." "It was behind us the entire way," Jothan spoke up. Barb nodded. "Almost overtaking us, but it never did. Instead, it washed away our tracks, just what we prayed for." Shem turned to the Shins and Briders. "Dek, you prayed for that storm, right?" Dek looked embarrassed. "I prayed to see Jatsi again." "Shem, didn't you pray for this storm?" asked Perrin. Shem threw up his arms. "I was praying to know what was up with Pato. I could tell he was furious, but I didn't know why." Mari raised her hand. "Well, I prayed for the storm." "Ah, there we go," Shem said. "Thank your mother for that one." Pato almost smiled. Almost. He hadn't prayed at all. "There's one more thing," Perrin said, so quietly that Pato almost missed it. "About that storm, son, as we listened to Thorn bellow in the dark, I heard another voice." He paused, and Pato looked up to see him genuinely unsure. But Shem nodded. "Go ahead, I think we all need to hear this." Perrin cleared his throat. It was a quiet and calm voice, but with enormous power, and it seemed to come from inside of me. It said that the storm was moving in, and that there'd be a strike of lightning behind us to separate us from danger. I was told to line up the horses so they'd run in the correct direction. It was a simple solution, but it wasn't mine. I was planning a scenario far more complex. Pato noticed a level of emotion not normally associated with the former colonel. "That was the Creator I heard, wasn't it, Shem?" Perrin asked. Shem smiled, a tear trickling down his cheek. "Not for the first time do I find myself envying you, Perrin." Pato knew Shem was addressing him again, but he couldn't focus on anything except for a crack in the rock, and that had gone runny. "Pato, in Salem, no one will force you to believe anything. You can doubt all you want, but it'll be very hard for you to deny or imagine away what you are feeling right now. That tightness in your chest, those tears in your eyes, yes, I see them, no sense pretending they're not there, are the Creator's ways of smacking you upside the head. You can still choose to be cynical and see only coincidences, but I choose to see miracles. And I'd much rather live in a world full of miracles than one filled with random chances." Shem crouched next to him and placed his hand on Pato's chest, again flooding him with heat. "Right there, you feel it. Don't ever forget what the Creator has done for you today." "I won't," was all that Pato could whisper. "This wasn't your plan, was it?" Shem said. Startled, Pato looked up at him. "You had another plan, and that's what's made you so frustrated. You couldn't see it through. Knowing you, it was noble, intent on saving your parents and restoring everything as it was." Pato's chin wobbled. "You may have even been a hero," Shem suggested, "which is the end goal of every teenage boy, I think. But Pato, it wasn't the Creator's plan. He wants something even more for you. And when you find out what it is, you'll look back on this day with relief and gratitude. Do you believe me? Do you trust me? The air was so thick with, well, Pato wasn't entirely sure, but it was nearly palpable. And it was also Ralph Shin, sitting again beside him. Later, a remnant of cynicism in his brain would say, "Oh, of course, Grandfather waited until this last moment to show up." But Ralph's message was undeniable. You're in the right place, son, going to the right place, and you're traveling with all of us. The best Pato could manage was a whispered, "I'm trying to trust you." "Trying is enough," Shem whispered back. Eventually, a quiet voice broke the reverent silence, and Jatsi sounded apologetic as she asked, "Shem, exactly when did Thorn kill you? I think I missed that part." And that's the end of the chapter. Thank you. Shem will tell her later. Don't worry about it.